The first snow of December drifted silently over the Appalachian ridge, wrapping the little valley below in a cold, blue stillness. Lanterns flickered inside a small wooden cabin, where an old man named Samuel Hargrove stood trembling by the doorway, clutching a worn leather Bible against his chest. His breath shook in the freezing air, but not from the cold. Across the yard, the barn door hung open, wide, almost pleading, and Samuel could see the faint outline of a coat lying near the snow-covered path. It was Jacob's coat, his grandson's. The boy had disappeared before dawn, leaving only that coat behind, as if dropped in a moment of panic or despair. "Jacob!" Samuel called out, his voice cracking through the quiet valley. Only the wind answered him, sweeping down from the mountains with a lonely whistle that made the old man's heart twist inside his chest. He stumbled forward, knees weak, eyes burning. His boots slid on the icy path as he lifted the coat with shaking hands. It was damp and warm, recent, too recent. And then he saw it. A small scrap of paper tucked inside the pocket, folded with care, but smudged at the edges as if held in anxious fingers. Samuel unfolded it, trying to steady his breath long enough to read the words. Only 2 lines were written. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I can't stay here anymore. I have to find Dad, even if it's Christmas." Samuel's chest tightened like a fist around his heart. The mountains around him suddenly felt cruel and endless. Jacob was only 13. The winter was harsh, and the trail leading north, toward the old logging roads, was no place for a searching, hurting child. Samuel whispered, "Lord, help me find that boy," and his voice trembled with a mix of fear and aching love. But it didn't start there. We must go back a little in time. If this story is already touching your heart, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest. And before we continue, comment below, "Lord, guide those who feel lost." Your words might lift someone who needs hope today. The story truly began weeks earlier, long before the snow had settled on the Appalachian peaks, and long before Samuel Hargrove found that lonely coat in the yard. Back then, autumn still clung stubbornly to the mountains, scattering its gold across the maple slopes and carrying the earthy scent of wood smoke through the valley. Samuel lived in a weathered cabin tucked between 2 ridges, a place he and his late wife Eleanor had built with their own hands nearly 40 years ago. The boards had darkened with time, the porch sagged a little, and the chimney stones had grown fuzzy with moss. But to Samuel it was still holy ground, a home shaped by prayer, laughter, shared sorrows, and the kind of quiet love only found in the countryside. Every morning began the same way. Long before sunrise, the rooster crowed, the creek murmured behind the cabin, and Samuel would heat a kettle on the old iron stove. He liked the peace of early morning, the hush before the world woke, when God seemed closer and the air felt fresh with new mercies. Sometimes Jacob woke early too, rubbing his eyes and complaining about the cold floors. "Morning, Grandpa," he'd mumble, pulling on wool socks. "Morning, son," Samuel would answer, handing him a steaming mug of cocoa. "God gave us another day. Let's make it count." Jacob was 13 but already tall for his age, all elbows and angles, still growing into himself. He had his father's dark hair and his grandmother's kind eyes, but lately those eyes had begun carrying a shadow, one Samuel recognized too well: loss. Ever since Jacob's father, Michael, had gone missing 2 years earlier, the boy had been slowly shrinking inside, like a young tree with roots pulled loose by a storm. Michael had left home after a hard season, too many bills, too much pride, too little faith. He told Samuel he was heading north to look for steady work, but after a few months, his letters stopped. His phone went dead. No trace, no answer. No explanation. Jacob had never forgiven the silence. Some nights, Samuel found the boy sitting on the porch steps, staring into the woods with that hollow look only a child carrying adult pain can have. The mountains echoed with crickets and owls, but Jacob's heart seemed to echo something heavier. "Grandpa," he whispered once, "do you think Dad still thinks about me?" Samuel sat beside him, folding his hands the same way he used to fold them when Michael was small. A father never forgets his child. "Not ever." Jacob kicked a pebble down the steps. "Then why hasn't he come back?" The question broke something in the old man. He swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Some men get lost, Jacob. Not just on the outside, but on the inside too. And when a man's heart loses its way, it takes the Lord's touch to guide him home." Jacob didn't answer. He only leaned his head against Samuel's shoulder, something he hadn't done since he was 10, and the old man wrapped an arm around him, fighting back tears. Life in the Appalachian Mountains had its rhythm, and Samuel worked hard to keep that rhythm steady for the boy's sake. Together they tended the small garden behind the cabin, fed the chickens, gathered eggs, and repaired old tools left dull by decades of use. The hammer handle was worn smooth where Eleanor once gripped it. The hoe still carried the scratch marks from the summer storms of '89. Jacob helped with everything, though some days his heart wasn't in it. Samuel didn't push him. He just kept showing him the simple, countrified wisdom he'd inherited. Mend what's broken, keep what's good, trust God with what you can't control. In the evenings, after supper, Samuel would read from Eleanor's old Bible. Its pages were yellowed, its binding frayed, but it still smelled faintly of her lavender drawer sachets. Jacob sometimes pretended not to listen, but Samuel saw the boy's eyes soften whenever he read the Psalms. One night, just as the last leaves were falling, Jacob asked quietly, "Do you think Dad will ever come home?" Samuel closed the Bible and sighed. "Son, God brings folks home in ways we don't always understand. Sometimes he sends a sign. Sometimes he sends a person. Sometimes he sends a moment that changes everything." The boy nodded as if he understood, but Samuel had noticed something shifting in him, little hints that Jacob had begun searching for something Samuel feared he couldn't provide. And though the mountains were peaceful, they were also wide and lonely, and filled with trails that could swallow a young boy's footsteps without a sound. Samuel didn't know it then, but Jacob's questions weren't just questions. They were seeds, seeds of a longing that would soon push the boy toward a dangerous path. And while the old man prayed faithfully every night, asking God to guard the child entrusted to him, something deep within Jacob was already restless, restless enough to run, restless enough to search, restless enough to leave a coat in the snow, and his grandfather trembling in the yard. As the autumn deepened and the mountains prepared for their long winter sleep, something quiet but powerful began stirring inside Jacob Hargrove. It wasn't rebellion, not really. It wasn't anger either, though he sometimes spoke sharply when Samuel asked him to help with chores. What stirred inside him was more fragile, more painful, a longing shaped like hope, worn thin by disappointment. Jacob had a dream, but he didn't know how to say it out loud. Most nights, he waited for Samuel to fall asleep before slipping out to the porch. The air would be cold enough to turn his breath into small clouds, and the trees along the ridge whispered like they were trading secrets with the wind. Jacob always looked toward the north, toward Tennessee, Kentucky, beyond. Somewhere out there, hidden in winter's shadows, was the one person whose absence kept scraping at the boy's heart. His father. Michael Hargrove had once been the kind of man who never missed a school play, who carved Jacob's name into the handle of a fishing pole, who carried the boy on his shoulders while walking along the creek. But the weight of lost work, rising bills, and failed hopes had changed him. First came the long silences, then the restless nights, then the arguments with Eleanor, and finally his leaving. Jacob replayed the memories endlessly, trying to figure out what had broken so badly inside his father that he walked out the door without looking back. One night, as the last of the firewood crackled inside the cabin, Jacob bowed his head on the porch rail and whispered a prayer. It was clumsy and raw, the kind spoken by someone who doesn't know all the right words but knows his heart has something to say. God, I just want to see him. I just want to know he's okay. If he's lost, help me find him. I can't stop thinking about him. His voice cracked, and he covered his face with trembling hands. Inside the cabin, Samuel lay awake. He heard the boy's soft sobs through the thin window pane. He closed his eyes and prayed in his own weary way. Lord, heal that boy's heart. Show him you're still here. Show him his father's story ain't finished. But Jacob's dream had already rooted itself deep. It wasn't grand like the dreams other boys had. No dreams of championships, shiny trucks, or college scholarships. Jacob wanted something much simpler, to bring his father home, to put his family back together, to feel whole again. And in his young, aching heart, he believed Christmas was the key. Jacob remembered how his father always softened around the holidays, how Michael once carved wooden ornaments shaped like stars and painted them gold. He remembered the nights they strung popcorn garlands, while Eleanor hummed Silent Night. He remembered the prayer Michael prayed one Christmas Eve, Lord, keep my family close, even when I fall short. Jacob held those memories like embers from a dying fire, blowing on them gently, hoping they would burn again. As snow threatened the mountain tops, Jacob made a decision, quiet, secret, and dangerous. He would search for his father. He didn't have a map or a plan, but he had hope, and sometimes hope feels like enough. He kept a small notebook under his pillow where he wrote down places Michael had once mentioned. A lumber yard in Harlan, a factory in Oak Ridge, a shelter in Knoxville. He studied the mountain trails. He watched the weather. He listened to travelers at the general store, pretending not to care. And every night, before blowing out the lantern, he whispered the same dream. Dad, please let me find you. In the stillness of the Appalachian night, a boy's fragile hope drifted upward like smoke. He dreamed not of presents or decorations, but of reunion, of arms wrapped around him, of a voice he hadn't heard in 2 years saying, I'm sorry, son, I'm home. Jacob believed it could happen. He believed Christmas could make it happen. But dreams, even holy ones, often sharpen the trials that follow, and the boy's dream was about to be tested in ways he could never imagine. Winter crept into the Appalachian Mountains with a slow, heavy breath. It settled first on the highest ridges, frosting the pines and bending the branches under its weight. Then it moved quietly into the valleys, sliding across the wooden fences, slipping under doors, stiffening the world one cold night at a time. Inside the Hargrove cabin, life grew harder, day by day, inch by inch. The chickens laid fewer eggs. The firewood pile shrank faster than Samuel planned. The little garden, once alive with tomatoes and green beans, sat buried beneath a thin layer of frost. Even the creek seemed slower, like it was shivering under winter's touch. Samuel felt the pressure of the season more than he let Jacob see. He woke every morning with stiff joints and a dull ache in his back, but he forced himself to keep moving. Idle hands get cold quicker, he always said. But the truth was, keeping busy kept him from thinking about Eleanor's empty chair and the worsening heaviness in Jacob's spirit. The boy was drifting, and Samuel could feel it the way an old farmer feels when a storm is coming, without seeing the clouds, but knowing they're there. One morning, while the wind howled down the ridge, Samuel walked outside to split firewood. Jacob followed, dragging his boots through the snow, shoulders slumped. He was normally quiet, but lately his silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was distance, sharp and cold. "You all right this morning, son?" Samuel asked, resting one hand on the axe handle. Jacob shrugged. "I guess." "You guess?" The boy tightened his jaw. "I'm fine, Grandpa." Samuel watched him for a long moment. "You ain't got to pretend with me." Jacob kept his eyes on the snow. "I'm not pretending." But Samuel saw right through him. The Lord gives some men a sense for hidden pain, and years of watching over Jacob had sharpened that sense into certainty. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic thud of the axe splitting wood echoing through the valley. Each swing felt heavier than the last. At one point, the axe slipped and nicked Samuel's palm, drawing a thin line of red. "Grandpa, you're bleeding," Jacob said, rushing forward. "It's just a scratch." Samuel wrapped a handkerchief around the cut, but the pause in his work allowed a wave of exhaustion to settle over him. Jacob's voice softened. "Maybe you should rest." Samuel shook his head. "Fire won't split itself. Winter ain't offering any kindness this year." The boy looked down, shoulders rising and falling in a sad, slow rhythm. Winter never does. Later that night, after a meager supper of cornbread and leftover stew, Jacob sat by the window staring into the dark. Snowflakes drifted in the lantern light, settling like tiny stars on the glass. Samuel watched him, heart heavy. "You thinking about your father?" he asked gently. Jacob didn't answer. His jaw tightened, and his eyes shimmered with a pain he refused to let fall. Samuel sighed softly. "Jacob, you're carrying too much alone." "I'm not a little kid," Jacob muttered. "No, you're not, but you're also not meant to walk this road by yourself." Samuel sat beside him, his old bones creaking. "Sometimes the hardest winter is the one inside us." Jacob looked away, blinking fast. The days continued like that, quiet tension, growing cold, and the kind of silence that says more than words. Jacob became restless, wandering the property for hours. He skipped chores. He stayed up late, staring at old photographs. He asked questions Samuel didn't know how to answer. One night, Samuel woke to the sound of muffled crying. He found Jacob sitting on the floor beside his bed, arms wrapped around his knees, face buried against them. "Son," Samuel whispered, kneeling beside him. Jacob shook his head. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking. What if Dad's out there and nobody cares? What if he's cold? What if he's hungry? What if he thinks I forgot him?" Samuel placed a hand on the boy's back, feeling every tremor. "Your father knows he's loved, and the Lord hasn't lost sight of him." "But I have!" Jacob nearly shouted, then quickly covered his mouth, ashamed of the outburst. Samuel's heart twisted. "Jacob, God carries the ones we can't reach." But Jacob didn't seem comforted. His breathing came uneven, his eyes wide and desperate. "I have to find him, Grandpa. I can't stay here forever waiting." Samuel had feared this moment. "You're too young to go wandering across these mountains. Winter will swallow you whole." Jacob stood up, fists clenched. "You don't understand. He needs me. And I need you too." Samuel's voice broke unexpectedly. "I can't lose you, Jacob." The boy froze, stunned by the emotion he rarely saw from his grandfather. Samuel steadied his voice. "Your father's story ain't finished, but neither is yours. And the Lord—" Jacob cut him off, shaking his head. "I've prayed. I've tried, but nothing changes." He turned away, shoulders trembling. Samuel reached out but stopped short. The space between them felt suddenly wide and fragile. That night, long after Jacob had fallen into an uneasy sleep, Samuel knelt beside the wood stove, the warmth barely touching his cold hands. He prayed the way a grieving man prays, slow, broken, desperate. "Lord, winter's pressing on that boy's heart harder than I can. Help him, guide him, don't let him slip away." Outside, the wind rattled the cabin walls like a warning. Inside, Jacob's restlessness grew into resolve. And without knowing it, Samuel's prayer had set something in motion, something that would carry Jacob away from the cabin and into the deep, dangerous heart of the mountains. The harsh Appalachian winter deepened, and Jacob's restlessness hardened into something more dangerous. Determination. He grew quieter, sharper, more distant. Samuel tried to reach him each morning, but the boy's eyes carried a faraway look, like his thoughts were already miles beyond the valley. But as Jacob's inner turmoil grew, another force crept into their lives, one that made everything heavier. In the mountains, winter wasn't the only thing that could press on a family. Sometimes people did too. One such person was Dale Whitmore, a middle-aged man who lived on the other side of the ridge. Dale ran a small, rough-edged trading post, known for selling things cheaper than they should be and buying things he shouldn't buy at all. Folks in town said he had a knack for sniffing out people's weakness, then turning it into opportunity for himself. Samuel had never liked Dale. Something in the man's eyes carried the green glint of envy, and his smile never reached both corners of his mouth at the same time. Still, in a small mountain community, you couldn't avoid someone forever. One morning, while Jacob was gathering kindling behind the cabin, Samuel hitched the old mule, Nettie, to the wagon. They needed flour, salt, kerosene, and a few other essentials. Not much, because the winter was tight, but enough to last the next couple of weeks. "Jacob, you want to ride into town with me?" Samuel asked. The boy hesitated. "No, I'll stay here." Samuel's chest tightened. "I'd like the company." Jacob shook his head. "I'm fine." The old man forced a smile, though it pained him. "All right, son, I won't be long." As Samuel rode down the trail, guided by the slow clop of Nettie's hooves, he prayed under his breath, "Lord, keep that boy close. Don't let him drift farther." The trading post sat crooked at the edge of town, a wooden structure leaning like it was tired of its own existence. Snow lay piled in dirty heaps beside the porch. The wind carried the distant laughter of men who had already begun drinking despite the early hour. Samuel tied Nettie to a post and walked inside. The bell above the door rang a dull, tinny note. "Well, if it ain't Samuel Hargrove," Dale called from behind the counter. "Come for supplies, or maybe a little extra cash." "I came for what I need," Samuel replied, keeping his tone even. "Flour, salt, small jug of kerosene." Dale smirked. "Winter's been rough on you, hasn't it? You look tired." "Winter's rough on everyone." Dale leaned closer. "Heard your grandson's been looking troubled." "Kids talk, Samuel. Folks say that boy's thinking of running off." Samuel stiffened. "Jacob's just grieving. He'll find his footing." Dale's grin widened, revealing the thin, opportunistic glint in his eyes. "Well, if he does run off and you get desperate, I'd be happy to buy that mule of yours, even that old wood stove. I know you're sentimental, but sentiment don't keep a man warm." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Nettie ain't for sale, and neither is anything else," Dale shrugged. "Suit yourself." Samuel paid for the supplies and stepped outside. The cold bit his face, but the sting wasn't from the wind. It was from the shame Dale had tried to plant in him. Men like Dale thrived on others' misfortune, twisting it into profit. Samuel lifted the wagon supplies and turned just in time to see Dale step out onto the porch. "You give that boy too much freedom," Dale called. "A kid with hurt in his heart can make foolish choices, might cause trouble for himself and for you." Samuel didn't answer. He simply climbed into the wagon and clicked the reins gently. Nettie moved forward, slow and steady, her breath puffing like smoke into the air. But Dale wasn't finished. "Hey, Samuel," he shouted. "If Jacob ever needs a man's guidance, real guidance, tell him I'm always willing to teach him how the world works." Samuel's eyes hardened. "The world you live in and the world I live in ain't the same, Dale." Dale only grinned. "That's what you think." Over the next week, the tension between Samuel and Jacob grew. The boy's secret longing for his father mixed dangerously with the seeds of doubt Dale had planted. Then, one afternoon, while Samuel was repairing the chicken coop, Jacob came rushing up the path, breathing hard. "Grandpa!" he said. I went down to the road for firewood, and Mr. Whitmore was there. He said he wanted to talk to me." Samuel's insides tightened like a knotted rope. "What did he want?" Jacob hesitated. "He asked me if I ever thought about leaving the mountains. Said there's better work north. Said people only get what they want if they're brave enough to go after it." Samuel set down his hammer. "Jacob, that man ain't your friend. He didn't say anything wrong. Son, men like Dale Whitmore use the truth like bait. They say pieces of it, not the whole thing." Jacob looked away. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I can't just wait forever." Samuel's voice softened. "Jacob, you're not ready for the world out there alone. You think I'm a child. No, I think you're hurting, and men like Dale see that hurt and know how to twist it." Jacob's face tightened with pride. "I'm not gullible." Samuel reached for him. "Listen to me, son. Your father didn't leave because he stopped loving you. He left because he was lost inside himself." Jacob shook his head. "I'm going to find him. I don't care what you say." The words cut deeper than Jacob intended, and he winced the moment he said them, but the damage was done. Samuel stepped back slowly, feeling something inside him crack, and that was when injustice struck the second time. 2 days later, Dale arrived at the cabin unannounced. Jacob was chopping wood while Samuel was inside preparing supper. Dale leaned on the fence and called out, "Boy, I can take you north if you really want to find your father. I know the roads. I know the towns." Jacob froze. "I can get you to the places he's been," Dale continued. "You just got to be brave enough to leave." Jacob's breath came quick and shallow. At that moment, Samuel burst out of the cabin, fury blazing in his eyes. "Dale Whitmore, you get off my property." Dale raised his hands casually, "Just talking to the boy. He deserves options." "You're filling his head with lies," Dale smirked. "If you say so." Jacob stood between them, overwhelmed. Samuel stepped closer. "You leave this boy alone, Dale. Or so help me, I'll make it known up and down this valley what kind of poison you're spreading." Dale's smile faded for the first time. "Careful now. You don't want to make enemies before winter's over." Samuel didn't blink. "Some enemies ain't worth fearing." Dale spat into the snow, then turned and walked away, but he left Jacob shaken, and Samuel knew the damage was deep. That night, Jacob barely touched his supper. His thoughts raced, tangled with grief, hope, and the dangerous temptation Dale had offered. By morning, Jacob was gone, and only the coat in the snow remained. Dawn crept over the ridge like a pale, trembling hand reaching across the mountains. Samuel had barely slept after discovering Jacob's coat and the note in the snow. Panic twisted through him, stiffening every bone, but beneath the panic was something else, an unmistakable fire, the kind that only rises in a soul when someone you love is in danger. He saddled Nettie and followed the faint trail of footprints toward the lower road. Snow had begun to fall again, soft but steady, threatening to erase the only clues he had. Samuel's breath formed clouds as he trudged forward, whispering over and over, "Lord, keep him safe. Please, keep him safe." Down the valley, the trail forked, one path toward town, the other toward the old logging roads. Samuel scanned the snow and saw smaller footprints heading left toward the forest. Jacob had gone toward the logging roads. The most dangerous direction. Samuel urged Nettie forward. After nearly an hour of riding through the narrow mountain pass, he spotted something ahead. A wagon tipped partially into a ditch near the tree line, the wheel cracked clean through. And beside it, pacing angrily in the snow, was Dale Whitmore. Samuel's heart clenched. He pulled Nettie to a stop. Dale turned sharply, his face red with cold and fury. "Well, look who it is! You didn't happen to see a kid come through, did you?" Samuel held his gaze. "I saw his tracks." "What are you doing out here, Dale?" Dale gestured sharply toward his wagon. "I was going after him, that's what. The boy's headed north, same as I told him. Thought I could help him, for a price." Samuel's jaw tightened. Dale's own words, for a price, exposed everything. "You were going to use him," Samuel said quietly. Dale scoffed. "He wanted to leave. I just gave him the chance." "Don't try to act holy, Samuel. You can't even keep the boy from running out on you." Samuel ignored the sting. "Where is he now?" "I don't know," Dale snapped. "Wagon hit a frozen patch, wheel split open. By the time I got out, the kid was gone. He kicked the broken wheel hard, but it didn't budge. Snow kept falling, gathering on Dale's coat, melting in his beard. Samuel watched him, really watched, and a truth settled clear and heavy in the cold mountain air. Dale hadn't just lost a wagon. He was losing his grip on the quiet power he'd held over desperate folks. "This ain't the boy's fault," Samuel said softly. "It's yours." Dale whirled around. "Don't preach to me, old man." Samuel pointed at the broken wagon. "Your greed brought you here. Your lies. You tried to send a child into danger for your own gain, and look what came of it." Dale's face twisted. "I was trying to help him." "No," Samuel answered firmly. "You were trying to own him. But God don't let wicked plans prosper forever." Dale fell silent, his breath coming in harsh bursts. Snow weighed down the edges of his coat. His hands shook, not from cold alone, but from the sudden, painful realization that he was stranded. No wagon, no leverage, no boy to manipulate. "You can come back to town with me," Samuel offered, though his tone remained steady. "But you'll answer for what you tried to do." Dale stared at the broken wheel again, shoulders dropping as the truth settled over him like frost. "I should have never gotten involved," he muttered. "Not with the boy, not with you." Samuel exhaled slowly. "Greed's a deep pit, Dale, and you keep digging it deeper." The wind shifted, scattering fresh snow over the wagon. Dale cursed under his breath, frustration breaking through whatever pride he had left. But Samuel wasn't finished. "If you know anything else, anything at all, about where Jacob might have gone, you tell me now." Dale hesitated. For a moment, the mask cracked. He mentioned the old railroad bridge," Dale admitted. "Said his father talked about walking through there on his way north." Samuel nodded, heart pounding with both fear and relief. A direction, a real lead. God had provided it, even through the lips of a dishonest man brought low by his own schemes. "Thank you," Samuel said. Dale looked away, ashamed, humiliated, defeated, not by Samuel, but by the consequences of his own greed. Samuel urged Nettie forward, praying hard as he rode. Jacob was still out there, cold and alone in the mountains, chasing a ghost of a father. But now Samuel had a path, and God had stripped away the man who tried to lead Jacob astray. The unjust had fallen. Now came the part Samuel feared most, finding the boy before the mountains claimed him. The old railroad bridge lay deep in the Appalachian woods, hidden beneath frost-covered pines and long-forgotten trails. Long ago, trains had thundered across it carrying lumber, coal, and men with dreams bigger than their pockets. Now it stood silent, a skeletal frame of weathered beams and rusting rails stretching over a narrow ravine. By the time Samuel reached its edge, dusk had begun to fall, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and blue. His breath puffed white in the frigid air as he strained to listen, hoping, praying, for any sign of Jacob. "Jacob!" he called across the ravine, his voice trembling with cold and fear. "Jacob's son! Answer me!" Only the wind replied, carrying the sharp scent of pine and snow. Nettie shifted anxiously beneath him. Samuel patted her neck with shaking hands. "I know, girl, I know. Keep steady now." He dismounted and scanned the ground. There near the bridge entrance, small, half-frozen footprints. Jacob's. Samuel felt his knees weaken. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "Guide me the rest of the way." He crossed the first few feet of the bridge carefully, boards creaking beneath his weight. The rails overhead hummed faintly as the wind pressed through them. The snowfall had slowed, but the cold had sharpened. Night was coming fast, and with it a deadly chill. "Jacob!" he called again, louder this time. "Jacob!" Then faintly, so faint he almost thought he imagined it, Samuel heard a sound, a voice, weak, fragile. "Grandpa!" Samuel's heart jolted. He hurried across the bridge, cautious but desperate. "Jacob, keep talking, son, I'm here." A muffled cry answered him from below the tracks. Samuel scanned the beams until he saw it, a small figure huddled against one of the lower supports, clinging to the wooden beam like a stranded kitten. Snow clung to Jacob's hair and eyebrows. His cheeks were bright red with cold. "Grandpa!" Jacob whispered, voice shaking. I slipped. I climbed down to look for the trail and I couldn't get back up." Samuel felt tears burn his eyes. "Hold on, Jacob. I'm coming." He moved carefully, gripping the beams, lowering himself toward the boy. His old joints screamed, but he ignored them. Every step was prayer. Every breath was plea. When he finally reached Jacob, he wrapped his arms around the trembling boy. Jacob collapsed into him, crying weakly. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I thought I could find Dad." Samuel pressed Jacob's head against his chest, tears falling into the boy's hair. "Son, nothing in this world matters more than you being safe. I was so scared." Jacob sobbed harder. "I didn't want to leave you. I had to try." Samuel's voice cracked. "And I'm proud you love your father. But you can't walk these mountains alone. Not in winter, not ever." The boy's small hands clutched Samuel's coat. "I thought God didn't hear me anymore." Samuel closed his eyes. "He hears you, Jacob. He brought me to you right on time." Together they climbed slowly back up the beams. Samuel lifted Jacob onto the bridge, then pulled himself up beside him. The boy collapsed into his grandfather's arms again, shivering. Samuel removed his own coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "Let's get you home, son." But before they could take a step, a sound echoed through the trees, soft, distant, familiar. A hymn. Samuel froze. Jacob looked up through his tears. "Grandpa, is that—" Voices drifted through the forest. The melody was unmistakable. "Oh come, Emmanuel." Church folks. Nighttime carolers from the small chapel down in the valley. Every Christmas Eve, they walked through the mountain trails singing hymns for the shut-ins and the elderly who couldn't make it to service. Samuel's heart swelled. "They're close," he whispered. "We're not alone." He carried Jacob across the bridge, moving toward the music as lantern lights began glowing through the trees. Soon, a group of bundled figures appeared, men and women holding candles, singing as their breath fogged the cold night air. "Samuel!" someone shouted. "Is that you and Jacob?" The group rushed toward them. The pastor, Reverend Collins, reached them first and wrapped his arms around Jacob. "Lord, have mercy," the Reverend breathed. "We've been praying for you two all evening." Jacob began to cry again, but this time from relief. Samuel lifted his eyes to the sky. Snow drifted gently through the lantern light like tiny blessings falling from heaven. "God sent you," Samuel whispered. Reverend Collins smiled. "God always sends help when the night is darkest." The group surrounded Samuel and Jacob, warming them, wrapping them in blankets, guiding them toward the path home. Lanterns flickered like stars in human hands, lighting the snowy trail. Halfway down the mountain, as the hymn rose again, "Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee." Jacob tugged gently on Samuel's sleeve. "Grandpa," he whispered, voice trembling but hopeful. Do you think Dad will ever find his way back too?" Samuel squeezed his hand. "Son, if God can bring us through the coldest night, He can bring your father home. In His time," Jacob nodded, tears shining like tiny crystals, and as they walked toward the warm glow of the cabin windows, Samuel felt it deep in his bones. They weren't returning home alone. God was walking with them, guiding, restoring, redeeming, right on time. Winter eventually loosened its grip on the Appalachian Mountains, but the lesson it left in Samuel and Jacob's hearts stayed warm long after the snow melted. Life returned to its gentle rhythm, morning prayers, quiet chores, soft hymns humming through the cabin. Yet something inside Jacob had changed, something deeper, steadier, braver. He no longer stared north with a desperate ache. He looked forward with hope instead. Samuel often caught the boy watching the horizon, not with longing, but with trust. And sometimes Jacob would whisper, almost to himself, "God brought Grandpa right when I needed him. Maybe he'll bring Dad too." The words no longer sounded like questions. They sounded like faith. In those peaceful weeks that followed, Samuel reflected on everything the mountains had taught them: loss, love, fear, searching, danger, rescue, and above all, divine timing. As he read from Eleanor's old Bible one evening, the flicker of the oil lamp danced across the worn pages, and Jacob listened with quiet reverence. Samuel closed the book and spoke with the gentle weight of old country wisdom. "Jacob, the Lord doesn't always stop us from walking into the cold, but he never lets us walk it alone, and he always sends his light when our night is darkest." Jacob nodded, leaning into his grandfather's side. And so the mountains carried their secret like an old-fashioned proverb, passed down through the wind. Those who search in their own strength grow weary, but those who wait on the Lord never walk lost. If this story touched your heart today, take a deep breath and remember, God never lets his children walk through the cold alone. Just like Jacob on that frozen bridge, maybe you too are searching for someone, or waiting for a prayer to be answered, or hoping for something that feels far away. But listen, God knows every step you've taken. He knows every tear you've hidden. And in his perfect time, he sends the light, the help, the message, the miracle you've been needing. So before you scroll away, let this story settle in your soul like a warm fire on a winter night. And if you believe God can guide anyone home, no matter how lost, write in the comments, "I believe God restores families." Your comment might be the reminder someone else desperately needs today. God bless you.